And finally, I see sort of like the long-term goal of this project. As I mentioned towards the beginning, I want it to become a platform for democratic web development. So the idea is you've got all these groups with persistent data, and they have control over their data. But the site as a whole is also like a group that whose persistent data would be the source code of the website itself. So if I could give the users control over the actual source code of the site, then it would become this cool sort of experiment in internet democracy, where no one person, not even me, would have total control over the development of the site. And I mean, the cool thing about this is, like, if you think about the internet's supposed to be this great democratic thing that leads to a more open society and all that good stuff. But if you think about it, the internet today is dominated by what would be better described as empires. There are these huge sites like Facebook and Google, which are ultimately controlled by one person or a small group of people. And if Facebook makes a change to their site that you don't like, there's nothing you can do about it other than stop using Facebook. They decide the terms of use. They decide the privacy policy. So really, these are more like dictatorships than democracies. So I think if you had some system of having a more democratic website, I think that would help the internet live up to what we think of it as, which is a source of democracy. And that's the end of my presentation. So thanks a lot for listening.
What do you envision as the users of this site?
Well, I think my first target audience is going to be the group that I'm working with, the Rensselaer Center for Open Source Software. So, I'll pitch it to them as something they can use for their own group to help coordinate programmers and decide how to spend resources, our funding, and all that stuff. But I mean, it can be used by any group really that needs to make decisions. I guess I see it as being most useful for groups that are big enough that they can't make decisions just by talking to each other in the traditional meeting style, but small enough that they don't need their own system for voting. Governments and unions, they all have their own systems, so I don't see them really buying into this. But smaller groups the group that's hosting this conference, they might be somebody use it. Even companies who want to have a more democratic way of running their company rather than just the CEO being a dictator, they can use this.
So I'm also from RPI, and there are so many things that we have to talk about. The first thing is, do you know Ned Woodhouse?
No, I do not.
You don't know Ned Woodhouse. So in the STS department, Ned Woodhouse is a Democratic theorist. He and I have been on and off for the last few years, been working effectively on the opposite side of this. So we're not doing technological development. We're working through the academic theory, the democratic theory side of what a system like this would look like.
Okay.
So we're actually drawing on democratic theory to take a look at other existing projects like this and see where they failed or not failed. Broadly, one of my big arguments is that the previous e-governance kinds of tools that have been implemented in the past were just basically taking offline government and face-to-face models and then dragging it online and saying, look, e-governance. And that's why they failed, because they fundamentally failed to take advantage of the technology. So I think all this is really fascinating stuff, and I'd love to talk with you more later, definitely. But the other thing that I just have to throw out there is Chris Kelty. I don't know if Chris Kelty's work at all. So Chris Kelty has done this really cool work on the cultural significance of free software. And in that book, he describes what he terms as a recursive public. which is a public that constantly can remodify the technological basis which allows it to exist. So it's basically taking the open source model into governance, or systems of governance, and this is just like exactly it, which is really cool to see someone implementing that kind of work in this way. So my hat is off. Real technical work coming out of this as opposed to people like me writing things about it. So.
Yeah, I definitely like to use as much of the theory that those types of studies have revealed. So like I'm sure you know about Arrow's theorem.
What's that?
Arrow's theorem?
No.
Maybe not? Okay, so it's like a theorem within game theory, which it's a proof that all voting mechanisms, when you have to decide between more than two options, they are not incentive compatible unless they are dictatorships, which means that there's always going to be a situation where somebody could have incentive to misrepresent their preferences because it would change the outcome. But anyway, so yeah, I definitely want to incorporate those sorts of theoretical backings into this.
I'd love to talk more.
Sure, we can talk.
I'll ramble on some more if you like.
Yeah, I'm not running this.
So another thing you might want to consider, one of the big issues in democratic theory, and we're talking about these, especially when you're talking about e-governance in any way, shape, or form, one of the major issues that's been faced by most of the people doing this kind of work has been how do we make people less thinking? So basically the issue is that you have this kind of problem between experts who know everything. They know all the various bits of the issues, and then you have everyday people who are not experts, but their perspective is very important just the same. So how do you get large groups of people together with experts to kind of deliberate through these kinds of issues and vote in a well-informed manner? And so it has always seemed like exactly that future that you're talking about with the people with their laptops. Like, part of that imagery has to be the idea that those people are somehow getting information about their world through that laptop and using that as a means by which to engage with other people and make more well-informed decisions about the world. But again, this is always this kind of tension between experts and the public in a way. And so my only critique of what you're doing there is that I don't see the feedback mechanism. Like, I would want to see how does that knowledge circle through? How do you take the ideas of the public, combine them with the experts, and then take that feedback through into the public sphere? So that ideally you would have this recursive process of constantly trying to make this more increasingly well-informed public, bringing them to this ideal of understanding about the world. So that ideally, as then what else was talking about, you get to the quote-unquote real issues, which I think is interesting. So I think you could do that there, though, because especially, I think you were already talking about it very briefly, kind of saying, I want to add bits of Reddit. What were you talking about?
Bits of what?
Reddit?
Oh, well, yeah, just that functionality of being able to vote things up or down.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have some use.
So were you planning on having conversation spaces with this as well?
Yeah, when I said discussion with feedback.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So looking for experts and things like that, and dragging them into the conversation. So that kind of work is really important to try to facilitate increased deliberation.
Yeah, I think part of this is the divide between democracies and republics, which is, democracies is the people can make decisions directly. Republics, they elect representatives. The typical criticism of democracy is that it leads to mob rule, and
it drowns the minority voices.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, this will support democracy and republics because you can't have titles that have more power than the other people. But I think if we I think like the internet is just like a new tool that hasn't been around previously. So I think it might make the more democratic types of government more viable than they have been in the past.
You can make a move towards more radical forms of democracy using internet technology.
Right.
That hasn't been done yet. There's been lots of people doing this kind of work, like trying to do that kind of stuff, but they've all, I think, like I said earlier, I think they failed to think about what bringing things online gives you, how you can fix the problems with face-to-face interaction through internet technology as a medium. And if you don't do that work, and I think whether you're consciously doing it or not, you're doing that work. Whether you do that, like, doing that work is the key to making e-governance technology. One comment on that. Like one benefit of having an online system versus face-to-face is I can never say this word, anonymity. Yeah.
So, like if you're having a discussion with people face-to-face, people might be intimidated by other people. They might not speak their mind when they actually have a useful opinion. But if you have like an anonymous discussion system, that's not a problem.
Sure. So that's exactly one of the issues. And I think in a lot of the other ones, people weren't necessarily anonymous. They tried a lot of stuff with like video conferencing. They tried various things with chat rooms. Almost all of it was based off of the Danish consensus conference model.
I don't mean to interrupt, but
no
it is just about time, so I'm going to cut you guys off. But I encourage you to talk more about it, because it sounds like you've got a plan. But we're going to move on to the next presentation.